All right, welcome everybody to the throne room. And Mindy and I feel like, royalty sitting up here on this stage. So I want to introduce Mindy Grossman, who is the CEO of Weight Watchers and now called WW, which Mindy is going to tell us a little bit about. I've known Mindy for about 15 years, and many people ask me, can you think of a leader that has head, heart, and guts? And I always think of Mindy. She always comes to mind as, in my mind, the leader that has all three. Many of you know about WW, but let me tell you a little bit about Mindy. She began her career in menswear, if you can believe it, with such brands like Jeffrey Banks and Tommy Hilfiger, and some of you may know about Polo jeans. Mindy started that. It grew the division from 0 to about 500 million. She moved to Nike in 2000, and at Nike she was responsible and the head of global apparel. And during the time that she was there, this is where I first met Mindy, and really came to admire her willingness and her courage to be authentic. If you can imagine sort of a glamorous New York fashion executive coming to the jock fraternity in Portland and surviving and thriving and really helping that company and that culture. And she grew the apparel business, almost doubled it in the time that she was there. And really moved the culture forward at Nike. And I think when she left, there was real tears among the jocks that she was departing. And they said it was sweat, but they were really sad to see her go. And she left to go run the Home Shopping Network, which maybe many of you know at that time was a channel. It was primarily one channel, and she turned the company around, took it public, created a number of new platforms in HSN, and really became known at that point as one of the 50 most powerful women in the US and in the world, and was on a number of Fortune 1000 lists in the world as well. So Mindy at HSN had a huge impact on the organization and the culture, and then decided at that point for a new challenge in her life and went to Weight Watchers, which is now WW. And the organization, we'll learn more about WW, but it's a community-based, purpose-driven organization. And one of the reasons that we wanted Mindy to speak today is not only about her own commitment to purpose, her own authenticity and courage as a leader, having been in a lot of difficult environments and turned them around, but also because of what she's doing with that organization and what it stands for. So Mindy, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you for that. I'm glad to be here.
So I want to start out, I'll ask questions for about 10 or 15 minutes, then we'll open it up to everybody. And let me just start with, why the change to WW?
So as you outlined, I'd spent almost 40 years, can't believe I said that number, in retail, in fashion, in sport, then in digital and media and content, and had done a lot of different things. But if you look at the arc of my career, I've always done the things that people don't think I'm going to do. And I love transformation. I love growth. I'm not the person you bring in to do a debt refinancing and figure out the financial machinations, although I know the finance. And I like to say that I look at businesses to see what's next and what it could be. And I've always loved legacy brands and businesses that have had emotional connections to consumers. But this is actually it was a 2-year journey for me to come here. I was at my last organization, as you mentioned. I turned around the company, I'd taken it public. And really the last 2 years I was there was a president of HSN, we had a catalog division that had a president. So I was spending my time doing a couple of things. We were going to transition to a CEO. I was going to become chairman. So I was focusing all my time on what's next. Where were we going to have to pivot? Where was the consumer going? What big investment decisions did we have to make for the future? And I actually started doing a lot of research, and I started speaking around the world in Dubai and in Vegas and other places on how the brands of the future were going to have to marry technology plus meaning to help people live more connected and more fulfilled lives. No matter what business you were in, you were gonna have to figure that out. Because too many people are technology for technology's sake or meaning, you've gotta be enabling. And in doing that, I started looking at these shifts in consumer behavior, which definitely took me not only into the connected home, connected health, but into health and wellness as a whole. And I started doing a lot of research, the growth of the market, the momentum in that business. And as much as I could have made that transition, I felt like I had one more big thing I wanted to do. And I knew I didn't want to be in retail, and I knew I didn't want to be in fashion. I had done it. And I swore to myself that if I was going to do one more thing, that not only did I want to deliver a financial return on equity, I wanted to deliver a human return on equity. It was very important to me. So in October 2015, I was watching CNBC, and I saw the announcement that Oprah had bought 10% of Weight Watchers and was going on the board. But more important, for the first time I heard that this company wanted to go from having such impact on people's lives in weight, but to become a more holistic partner in wellness. And if you think about it, there is no global company that owns wellness as a partner. Mm-hmm. There isn't one. So not thinking I would ever be at the company, my husband's a trader, I walked into his office and I said, there's something interesting here, buy some stock. The stock was like at $6 or something. And he didn't listen to me right away, kind of another month or so. Anyway, the joke is we ended up buying 11,000 shares of stock at 8. And I said, see, you should have bought more. And he goes, no, now you're there, you can't sell it. So it doesn't matter. Anyway.
The stock has tripled, I should say.
Fast forward, it was about a year later, and I saw that they had parted ways with their CEO, and I still thought it was interesting. And during this time, I was getting every phone call for these big retail jobs. You know, go run Target, go run Tiffany. And I kept explaining, no, this is not what I want to do. At the end of November, I yet got another call from someone, and I think I forget what company. And I said, no, I don't care if it's $30 billion, I don't care if it's $10 billion, it's not what I want to do. I said, but don't you have the Weight Watchers search? They said, yes, a colleague does. I said, why hasn't anyone called me? And they said, well, you know, it went through financial issues and it's not as big as what you were running and it's not, and I said, that's the problem. It's not about a resume, it's about understanding who the people are and what might tap into the emotions. And they said, are you interested? And I said, I don't know if I'm interested, I'm curious. And that's how the whole thing started. And, you know, and I spent a tremendous amount of due diligence. The company had a near-death experience at the end of 14-15, theoretically had 8 times debt leverage. I had to feel that I was going into a company. I had to feel that the board was going to support the efforts. And everyone here knows that what's happening today is the use of the word transformation has become so trite. Because all of these companies say they want to hire a transformational CEO, and they come in and they start doing the work and the boards get scared and they're out in a year. And that wasn't where I wanted to end my career. And so I ended up really doing a lot of diligence, but more importantly, I ended up writing a 4-page manifesto to the board of what I saw the opportunity was for this company that was built on community and science. Now, because of the capabilities of technology and personalization and where consumer behavior was going and how they thought about themselves from a health perspective and what wellness meant, we could be that global partner. So I sent the manifesto and said, if this is what you see, I'll be there. But if not, I'll find something else.
So you mentioned authentic partner. I mean, there are a lot of weight loss companies, lifestyle companies, you know, offering to be authentic partner. How do you stand out in the noise, and what is authentic?
Well, that's what I'm saying. What is authenticity? And you know, if you think about it, the company was started by a young female entrepreneur 55 years ago, really creating a program of healthy eating, but understanding the power of inspired community and people coming together and doing it together. And you know, a lot of times when you go into a company that maybe wasn't doing well or did, the first thing that you need to fix is the product. We had a spectacular product. We had just lost relevancy and how we were going to enhance people's lives. And it became very clear to me when I got to the company in July, of 2017, that our competition was not diet companies. Our competition were people thinking that they could get healthy themselves. And the clarity of what that meant changed our whole perspective in how we had to envision our brand. So I spent the first month doing deep dives in every area of the business, kind of assessing the culture of the company, which, the company, as I said, went through a very difficult time, and they had to make a lot of hard decisions on people and things. The good news is, because it's a purpose-driven organization to start, sometimes you go into companies and people are skeptical. They were at a point where they were embracing new leadership, which is not always the case. But then we realized we had to rebuild every part of the vision. So we brought a team together from 10 different countries of emerging leaders, different areas of the business, to build what we called the Future Impact Manifesto of what our brand was going to be on the world. We did use one partner. We used SY Partners, who works with transformational CEOs and teams. So when Howard came back into Starbucks and Ginny at IBM and a number of other businesses, but we built it from within, and I think that's really important. I think too many companies and there's nothing wrong with consultants, but you can't abdicate the ownership of your brand and your business. And it was truly built from people who'd been at the company for 30 years and people who just come in the company. So we presented that to the board in December, fortunately to great response. And then on February 7th of this year, we took over Alice Tully Hall, and we had 1,000 people, and we live streamed it to 18,000 people on Facebook Workplace. We're actually a case study for Facebook Workplace. And we did about an hour and a half multimedia presentation on the future of our brand and our new purpose, which is we inspire healthy habits for real life, for people, families, communities, the world, for everyone, and that we were going to be the brand to democratize wellness. More importantly, we were going to be the brand that was going to solve the paradox, and I'm sure you're all dealing with it today. Everybody's talking about wellness like it's the holy grail and the $3.7 trillion economy, and every company's calling themselves a wellness company, and we're all excited about a $10 smoothie and a $50 face mask, and the world is getting unhealthier every day. If we do not do something, millennials will be the most obese generation in history, and today's 2-year-old has a better chance of being unhealthy than unhealthy. So what we said is we, along with partners, want to help solve the paradox. That was February. We also did something very, very different. 2 weeks before we were about to launch internally, my CFO and I, he's a very visionary CFO, said, you know what? We're giving our goals by the end of 2020. We're going to make this available to everyone. And we made the decision to stream our employee event on our investor site. And I think the fact that we did that was such a statement of who we were and what we were going to do. So the internal employees were so proud that this was not an investor event that they were watching. This was an employee event because they are our biggest evangelists and our members. And that set a tone that completely changed the perspective. And then fast forward, last week, I was actually here as well in Chicago, we did a major announcement about the evolution of the brand, our technology, many, many, many of the things that we were going to do to live up to this move from weight to wellness. So the name is moving from the name to the WW mark. The tagline is Wellness That Works. Everything we do now is about what you put in your body, how you move your body, how your mind supports your efforts, how community can be more personalized and customized, and how you're incented to be able to be more successful.
So Mindy, you're a public company CEO and you're under constant pressure, right, to deliver results, both short term and kind of grow members. You know, how do you balance the needs of those investors who are, I'm sure, looking at your performance and your growth with, you know, the authentic needs of your consumers? I mean, you are for profit, right? And yet consumers have needs that you're serving. So you must keep those in balance.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was after our second quarter, I mean, we came into the year and to David's point, the stock has, you know, gone crazy, and we've been growing at 30% plus, et cetera. And when we put our goals out to be over $2 billion by the end of 2020, we had only done $1 billion in 2016. There was some skepticism until we came out with, you know, the performance. But we are transitioning from being a controlled company, even though we're public, to a true public company, and we've been on the road show. And so when we came out second quarter, there was a lot of new people in the stock and a lot of things, and not everybody understood the seasonality of the business, so there was, you know, a lot of volatility. And my head of corporate communications said to me, "How are you managing this? And you're so unflappable." And I said, "Because I've played this movie before." If I reacted to every short term, I said, our job is to execute on what we said we're going to execute. It's not to manage to a stock price. It is to be transparent, is to be out there with our investors. It is to be very clear about what we're trying to do, and it's very steady and very measured. And that's the approach that we take. And as much as, yes, we give guidance, and yes, we are responsible to be able to perform given how we've articulated we're going to perform, we truly have to be looking at long term. Because, you know, what we said is we're going to make sure that even on the trajectory of growth that we're communicating, we will consistently be growing our bottom line at a greater degree than our top line. That's what we've committed to, and that's what we're delivering. If all of a sudden, you know, we're trying to do something in the short term and we upset the apple cart, we've ruined everything else that we're trying to do. And, you know, I take it really seriously. I take the responsibility of being a public company CEO really seriously. But if we deliver on what we say we're going to deliver for our member, for their communities, and for their families, we will deliver on the financial return on equity. So I have to be maniacally focused on that.
Yeah, yeah. I want to ask you a little bit about your own leadership philosophy. And, you know, in a lot of companies today, if you steal $50, you're intentionally driven out of the company. If you demoralize 50 people, nothing happens. You know, what's your philosophy around leadership in terms of creating an environment where people are engaged and committed and, you know?
So I have a philosophy that there's zero tolerance for toxicity, and I don't really care how talented you are. And I've probably fired some of the most talented people I maybe have ever worked with because they were not going to live up to the culture and what we needed to accomplish as a company. What people don't understand is if you tolerate that, you're going to lose other great talent because, you know, people aren't going to want to stay there. So, you know, I'm a huge believer. I've been quoted many times of saying I believe that culture trumps strategy. It doesn't mean you don't have a strategy, but if you don't have an engaged, purpose-driven, aligned, motivated culture, you're not going to be able to be sustainable in the long term. If you don't embrace diversity at every level, you're not going to be successful and sustainable in the long term. And it has to be very clear, and it has to be clear that the board feels that way, that the CEO feels that way, that the leadership team feels that way. And you know, my first day or second day at the company when I did my first town hall, I think some people expected me to get up there and just talk about my resume and these things that I've done and what I wanted to do. And all I talked about is what I saw and why I joined this incredible company. And then I talked about my life. I showed pictures of my granddaughter. I showed pictures of my climbing in Indonesia. I showed, you know, everything I could think of to make people understand who I was. And I think humanity is also really important, but I also made it very clear what my philosophies are around culture, and around diversity and around how people have to interface and respect one another, how I embrace what I call productive discomfort, that people have to be able to have the right conversations. And I just think when you show up that first day or that second day, what you do in that first moment defines how people are going to perceive you. And I think that was very important.
I want to ask you about women in leadership as a female CEO. You know, the Wall Street Journal said there are fewer female CEOs than there were 5 years ago, just last week. We seem to be going in the wrong direction. Why is that the case?
So let me start with a couple of things. I think it's really, really unfortunate on many, many levels. I think it's unfortunate for culture. I think it's unfortunate for business. But let me start at the high level. When we talk about leadership and gender or diversity, I believe that the qualities of great leadership are genderless, right? Best people I've ever worked for were men. The worst person I ever worked for was a woman, okay? So let's start with what the qualities of leadership are. And I think we have a quality of leadership gap in many, many different companies. Because if the quality of leadership is around, yes, you need to have a vision, you need to empower people with that vision, you need to hold them accountable, you have to give them the tools, you have to embrace diversity at every level within the company and hold yourself to that standard. You have to have a level of humanity. You have to, I can go through it, right? If you have that, you will generally have across the board a more diverse culture and company, and you have made it clear that that's important. You've held your teams accountable for their succession plans. You've created an environment where, whether it's women or men who need support to be able to continue their careers, are there. And I just don't think there's enough of that, and I don't think boards and and CEOs are holding themselves accountable for creating those atmospheres. And you know, I said the other day, I've gone from being annoyed to angry to infuriated that we've not made more progress. And so for 20 years, that's been my platform. Certainly I talk about my company and what we're trying to accomplish, but you know, I really have spoken about it a lot. And I've even spoken about the fact it's not that I don't appreciate going to women's conferences, but you have to have diverse people in the room to have these conversations. And you know, I started writing. I'm an influencer on LinkedIn, and the first thing I wrote was, you know, the importance and how you create a purpose-driven culture.
Yeah. So how do you think this intersects with the whole Me Too movement that's going on in this country? I mean, we're at an interesting, critical juncture in this culture, politically and nationally and so forth. You know, with the focus on diversity and kind of the emphasis you've made on leadership, what do you think is going to be the impact of Me Too?
So let's talk about Me Too and what it really stands for. Because I don't think the issue we have is just a gender issue. I think there's a gender issue, an equality issue, an issue in underserved communities, and I think there's a massive power disconnect issue. And a lot of what we're seeing of what transpired that is what created some of the grotesque gender issues that we saw started as a power issue. Because it goes back to toxicity. In most of these cases, people were aware. People were aware, but they felt they couldn't say something because somebody was in a different power circle that other people were protecting. And I think it goes back to, unless we change, right, the cultures of these environments and people feel they have a different level. And look, what's happening in politics and what's happening everywhere else isn't helping the situation. And that's a power issue, and that's an elitist issue. And you know I've obviously talked to a lot of my peers, male and female. We're coming together more to say, how can we make an impact? You know, Fortune created the CEO initiative, so there's 102 CEOs who have committed both financially and coming together that not only do we want to run our businesses, but collectively we want to work together to create social change in the right way. And how do we learn from one another? And how do we start seeing movement around all of these issues? Because it's critical.
Yeah. I want to ask one more question, then we'll open it up. So this is a group of leadership development, business schools, leadership development experts. You know, we're engaged in developing moral, ethical leaders. Given what you just said, what's your advice to us?
So what I've seen is the ability to develop healthy cultures, great leaders, can't be one part of the company's responsibility, can't be one group's responsibility. It has to be owned, committed to, vocally, at the very top of the organization and the board. And if it's not, and it's in an isolated group that's, you know, trying to do, you know, offsites or programs or this, and I've seen that. And I think it's really important that no matter where you are, if that's not going to be at the upper echelons, either they have to be educated and held accountable, or it's never really going to happen at a level that it needs to happen organically.
All right, so let's open it up. Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Mindy or topics that they'd like to raise or bring up? We'd kind of throw it open to anybody on the floor.
I'm quite interested in your perspective on access to data. A lot of medical data or data in terms of wearables and fitness means that people will be, companies will have access to our data. I'm just interested in your perspective on that.
So I think data is one of the most powerful things we have to actually improve our communication with people, improve people's outcomes, and everything else. And it's been very interesting to me because I've obviously been spending a lot of time with a lot of the companies in the health field and everything else. And what's really interesting is we will give every piece of data that we have in our lives in an extreme way to kind of Amazon, right? But then we're afraid to give our data to someone who's really going to help us be healthier, right? And I think because there's so much data scare, you know, that people don't really know the truth about what's happening. And I was talking to the CEO of United Healthcare about this. You know, obviously for us, we just built a data and AI team. Why? Because the more we can personalize and the more we can understand, you know, people's information, whether it be their behavioral information or what they're telling us, or what they're tracking and things like that, the more we can help them be more successful on their journey. So that's positive from a business perspective, but it's also going to make people be healthier on a more sustainable basis. And I think we just all have to be aware that what we can perceive as a negative can also be the most powerful thing we have. And so I'm a big believer. I'm not as scared. Now, I do think we have a responsibility as organizations that if you ask us what's our number one priority, it's cybersecurity, it's protection of data, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's going to be more and more heightened, more and more scrutinized on the behalf of companies, which it has to. But that's the world we're in. So we have to look at it from a positive framework as opposed to a negative framework.
Other questions?
Hi, I was just talking with some colleagues last night about sort of the absence of some really strong female role leaders. So I guess it's a reminder to put stuff out there because now you're here on the stage. So thanks for being here. I'm curious about, we have a whole bunch of next-gen leaders, and I guess I'm not in that group, but I'll put my group, myself in the category of being curious around your pivot moments in your life. So I'm sure it's not been smooth sailing, and we talk a lot about vulnerability here. I'm curious about your moments of learning.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I call myself an accidental CEO. I think when I first started my career, I didn't even know if I really knew what a CEO was. I was planning to go, I started college at 16, first generation to go. My mother didn't even finish high school. I was an adopted kid. And, so you were a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant. And I was going to make a lousy accountant. I didn't want to be a doctor, so I was going to be a lawyer. Got engaged when I was 19. And I was in my last semester of my senior year of college, GW, and I literally had this epiphany that this wasn't the life I wanted to do. So imagine calling your stereotypical Jewish mother and going, I've got something to tell you. I'm not going to law school, I'm not getting married, I'm breaking my engagement, I'm leaving right now and I'm moving to New York, which is what I did. And I ended up in the menswear business. So for me, what that proved to me throughout was a pivotal moment when I realized that not taking the risk was riskier than taking the risk and doing what felt right, but also knowing that there's a difference between risk and suicide. So I tell people, don't be afraid, that risk-taking and boldness are the essence of transformation, but be cognizant of what you're doing and what level of risk you're willing to take at any different time. I think the second thing that I tell people, there's three things that have guided my life. Passion, am I passionate about it? Do I believe in it? Do I want to wake up in the morning and conquer it? But is it purposeful? Is it going to take me? Is it going to take the business anywhere? And will it have impact? And I feel that I aim to have impact just as much in my first job as I do today. Now, my level of impact is greater. So if I did not use this platform that I worked so hard to build, both my personal platform business, and I did not use it to have great impact, then I wouldn't be fulfilling what I needed to do. And then I'd say the last things were, and I talk about it all this time, is this idea of you've got to have a maniacal belief in yourself, or why is anyone going to believe you? And we tend to say that, but a lot of people don't feel that. You start to doubt yourself. I think women even more so than men, because there's this feeling you have to be perfect before you move forward, and that's not the case. And then lastly, David, has been my coach and mentor for almost 16 years. And one of the most powerful things that came out of our first working together was this acute self-awareness of what you're great at, what you're not, what your weaknesses are. I almost now wear it in a weird way as a badge of honor, that I could tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I'm okay with that. But that acute self-awareness of your impact on other people. So, you take all of those things and you change insecurity to empowerment, and it gives you the confidence to do the things that you might not want to do and go into more difficult situations or put yourself out there. And I think you can do that at any step of your career.
But I think, Mindy, as a leader, you've never been afraid to show your vulnerability or your humanity. Has that been a risk for you as a woman in companies? Because you've been in some pretty tough situations.
Yeah. The way I think about it, what's the alternative? I don't feel I'm a person that could be two people. I can't be one person at work and one person at home and one person. It's hard enough to do this job and be one person, right? And I just looked at it as what's the alternative, and if I was maybe in a different company, could it not have been an asset? But I do think, and I'm hopeful that that's going to evolve, and I am seeing that more. I think there's an expectation, particularly of younger generations, that they want this idea of humanity and transparency and realness, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Good. Other questions?
Thank you for being here, first of all. And my question is, I hear you talk a lot about a culture of accountability. And what I've noticed is a lot of organizations saying, yes, we want this culture of accountability, but are having a really hard time actually implementing that. So I'm wondering what specific behaviors as a leader that you have or organizational systems that you've put in place that actually help to create that culture.
Sure. So what we did when we created this impact manifesto, it had, what our purpose was, what the core tenets were. So, built-in science, community, technology, or whatever it was. The fundamentals of how we were going to work together as an organization around human-centric science, all those things. And then we put our goals through the end of 2020, brand, reputation, and business. And then what were the bold moves we were going to make? And then what were the very specific KPIs that we were going to hold ourselves accountable for? We then did an exercise where that went throughout the entire organization to every team, while at the same time we were reorganizing the entire company around that, which was not a small feat. And so we built very specific KPIs. So for example, with my team, there's very, very detailed bold move maps that, I take one day a month, that's a full day just with that with my team, and then, we come together, and that's trickled down throughout the organization. We also changed how we did all people's goals for the year. So they all built off of the impact manifesto. So everything was built, identified what what you needed to do in your capacity, what were your KPIs, and every team has to have the lockstep in mechanism. And that was a big change because and because they'd gone through a difficult period, everybody was almost too nice. Oh, it's okay. So we had to go back to saying, no, if we're going to really change humanity, we have to hold ourselves accountable, which means you have to hold ourselves accountable. The other thing that I spent a lot of time talking to the company about is everybody needs to think like the CEO. And what I mean by that is if you see something or if you feel that there's a better way to do something, but it actually might impact you negatively, you still need to come forward with doing it because you'll actually be recognized positively for that. And that engendered a lot of conversations. And then lastly, we created, and we're actually rolling out wave 2 of our workshops because we just finished our impact behaviors. So stay curious, act boldly, win together, make a difference, and there's everything under. So we're now rolling out the workshops of that. So you have the quant and the qual.
Good, good. Other questions?
Oh, thank you. My name is Timothy Mdinka from Tanzania. Since we started this forum, there are two words that have been coming in: interesting and interested. And I heard you saying you are not interested, but you are curious. So that has come to be like the third one. What did you mean here by not interested and you are curious to take whatever you decided?
So here's how I define curious, right? I think too many people stay in their box. So you're in this area of the company and you are, well, I'll give you a different example. When I was at my other, you're in the beauty business. You tend to go to things in the beauty business, you talk to people in the beauty business. You know what, you should be going to the Consumer Electronics Show. You should be seeing what every area of culture has. I am voraciously curious. David knows. I read, I consume content. I allocate 5 hours a week to doing something, meeting someone, or something I'm curious about. I've been known to stalk people if I want to see and meet. It's a very quick story. When Adam Grant launched his book, Give and Take, I saw him on TV, and I said, this book aligns with my philosophy of leadership. I want to meet this guy. Tracked down, I was able to meet his literary agent who introduced me to him. I looked at his book tour. I saw he was going to be in Orlando. I was in St. Pete. I reached out to him and I said, look, you're in Orlando. It's an hour and 15 minutes away. I want to take you out for dinner, and you just wrote a book called Give and Take, so you have to come. He did. And now he's a friend. But you know, that's a kind of curiosity. And another example, I don't know, does anyone read The Skim? Any of the women here read The Skim? Okay. Two young entrepreneurs, Carly and Danielle, started The Skim. And they're also really curious. They've created a, let's call it, it's basically become a community, but it started as a content creation thing. They tracked me. They kept sending me a note. Now, I always responded. I said, I'd love to meet you at some point, whatever. Anyway, I finally did, and I agreed to do their podcast. But they're relentlessly curious, and they're going to do it in a way that's really positive. And I tell people that all the time. And actually, I also give people permission. And I think that's really important. So, you know, I sit with people, even on my team, and say, what are you curious about? What do you think you need to learn to be better? So my last company, the person I thought had the potential to be the president of Edition, didn't have an MBA, didn't have a financial background. I said, you're going to Harvard. You're taking this financial, you know, for people who are going to go into the next position. So, you know, if you're going to tell people to do things, then you can't go, well, why are you here and not there? But I think it's huge.
Who are you stalking today? In other words, what are you reading?
Actually, I told them I'm reading a really interesting book right now called Everybody Lies. And it really is about data and different ways of looking at data. And the interesting thing is the first chapter is about the election that was, and how it was surprising if you really understand. And this particular writer actually was Google Trends, but he's since done an obsessive amount of work in so many different areas. And you know, I keep thinking about that, especially in a business that really requires a knowledge of human behavior, not just the quant side, but the qual side. Yeah. So our consumer intelligence group, which is a pretty important group in our company, we're big data and we're little data. We'll be in people's homes and we'll be looking at, you know, every number that we can.
I want to ask you a personal question. You know, you've been married a long time. Your grandmother, you know, through the years, you've kept it in balance and you've managed to maintain all aspects of your life. How have you done it? I mean, what are your, looking back, you know, what have been your big insights about how to do your life?
So I would say I never succumbed to the belief that you can have it. I always succumb to the belief that you can have it all, you just couldn't have it all at the same time. And there were periods of times that I allowed myself to have these guilt moments that I wasn't there. For example, when I worked for Nike, I was in Portland, my family was in New York, I was out of the country 30% of the time. And as much as they were supportive, you know, it was challenging at times. But where I reconciled it is I made the important things important at the right time. And I made it clear what those important things were. But I think it's still a challenge for people. And that's why I don't believe in bifurcating your life. Mm-hmm. Because if you do, it's that much harder. Mm-hmm. So I would think nothing from bringing my daughter into, you know, work if I needed to, or, you know, making a decision to leave because I had to go somewhere, even if it meant I stayed up till 2 a.m. to finish something. So I think the most important thing was decide what's important at the important times that makes sense. But it wasn't like it was easy at times.
And it must have taken courage at different points to do what you thought was right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yes.
Hi, Mindy. I stand up because it's a bit of a distance. I've just come out of a 3 weeks fasting retreat, so I might just be ready for your new purpose and wellness. And for me, the common ground between leadership and what you try to achieve seem to be one thing, which is habits. So how do we get leaders to follow healthy habits for organizations, and how do you get your customers to follow healthy habits for well-being? And I'm really wondering how you as an organization and you as a leadership team think about habits, whether you are maybe collaborating with some of the researchers that are doing a lot of research on the topic at the moment, like the Nudge Unit or other people like that, and how you're hoping to change habits.
Yeah, I think that is a great question, and it's very much a part of everything that we're doing. But just to give you some perspective, 10 years ago, you wouldn't have heard habits in the vernacular because it would seem onerous and it would have a negative connotation. Today it has a very positive connotation. People want healthy habits that fit into their life. Those small acts repeated over and over again that eventually become your own human nature. And so the first thing is identify what those healthy habits are. So we have a very big scientific team, chief scientific officer, scientific advisory board. Actually, we just started a youth advisory board of PhDs, MDs, leaders from about 9 different countries, 26 experts that have now met 4 times, because we know if we're really going to have impact on the future, we also have to figure out how to help families, just because of how significant the issues are. So everything we do is science-led. So we have, if you look at our food program, it's built so people can understand what choices they can make to eat as healthy as they can, whether they want to lose weight or not. So quick example, every food, we have one of the largest food databases in the world. Every food is evaluated on calories, nutrients, fats, sugars, and satiety. Does it fill you up? And then it creates kind of a program for what's going to make sense, with the belief that if you do this over a sustainable period of time, it will inherently become an ingrained habit of how you make better choices. We're now applying the same thing to activity. So what is the best combination of duration, intensity, strength, etc., that you can have, repeat over and over, and then the same thing in mindset. So we just announced a partnership with Headspace, which will be integrated within, the app. But the important thing about habits, and where the world is changing, and everybody keeps asking me, well, nobody wants to diet. I said, I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to diet either. That's not relevant today. What's relevant today is, what are those things that are sustainable, that aren't punitive, that aren't restrictive, but that can fit into your life, right? So I just say in the industry, like 5 years ago, people would sign a celebrity, they'd hide them in a room for 6 months, and then they'd come out and jump out on the TV screen going, I just did this. That is not reality, right? That's not what people want today. They don't want some airbrush version of what life is. And I joke around, for somebody that worked for lifestyle brands most of their career, we don't use the word lifestyle, we use the word livability. We want to be a livability brand. And so today, when we may have an influencer or a partner, we start at the beginning of the journey. People want to understand what people have gone through and how things are working in their lives. And not everybody's going to relate to everyone, but it's not just people who have to lose weight. So for example, Kevin Smith became one of our ambassadors after he had his heart attack. He needed to learn. He needed to learn. He didn't need just to fix something. So, I think people want something very different today. And that's what we're trying to do.
And is that where the community comes in as really supportive of people's changes?
Well, to me, community is table stakes for us. It's the foundation of who we are. But how people want community today are different. So, when the community first started, it was people meeting, physically. And today, people want to define what community means to them and how they want to access community. So we have about 4.5 million subscribers right this second, and they all are in the app and using the app, etc., which gives them everything. But a big element of our retention and why people come is something called Connect. So it's our Facebook, Instagram, but within the community. It's, the most unbelievably supportive, inspired community I've seen in my life. And that's what people crave, and they want to crave what community means to them. But of those 4.6 million, 5 million, 1.6 million also choose to go to physical meetings. We have 30,000 meetings a week. But that's up to them. So letting people define what community means to them, and actually tomorrow we launch something called Connect Communities. You will be able to form and find the community you relate to. Young moms, college students, gluten-free, whatever it is. And however, people today define themselves as whatever they want to define themselves. Yeah. So they're going to find the community that they feel makes sense. And then there are some people that want the whole community. Yeah. But it's a very, very important element of inspiration.
Yeah. Good. We have time for just a couple more questions. Oh.
Super quick. Is there any distinction between the efficacy or retention of folks who meet in person versus the online community?
So it's very interesting you said that. So before I got to the company, I made the assumption that if you went to physical, you'd have no. And the reason is because of the digital community, that people engage with that community every day. Now, there are people who go to the meetings that are also engaged in the digital community. But just to give you an idea, I got a note from one of the Connect members the other day. I started crying reading the note. She basically said she joined, she loved her community, her physical community. She started posting on Connect. She had like 200 followers. And she was, in a good place, and then very unexpectedly and tragically, her son committed suicide. And she happened in a moment of, she just was pouring out. She posted. The community came together in so way. 11,000 people came to her support. People offered to come to her home with food. People offered to come, and she's now meeting people, and she goes, "It saved my life." And so when you think of that, that's, to me, our unique point of differentiation, because it's not about the food you eat, right? The number one hashtag in that community is hashtag NSV, non-scale victory. Here, I was able to run a marathon. And so if we lead with the why, and we lead with the support, and then give the tools, and that doesn't just apply to our business. That applies to other business. What are you leading with? And if you're leading what is the why that you're trying to help somebody accomplish, then you build from there.
Hi, great talk. I'm learning a tremendous amount from you. Thank you very much. My name's David. I have a two-part question. A lot of what you've been talking about is a lot of social change, right? Changing the way that people behave in society. How far do you think you should, and WW should, take that into social justice? And the second part of the question is, in that 50% of 2-year-olds that are more likely to have an unhealthy lifestyle than a healthy lifestyle, a lot of those are in underserved communities, and I would suspect that those communities aren't as represented in your workforce. Maybe they are. How do you stay in touch with the needs and motivation of some of the most vulnerable people?
Okay, so I'm going to answer them in two different things. So one of the things that was very important to us when we launched our Impact Manifesto was that if we were going to democratize wellness, it needed to be accessible to all. And obesity doesn't discriminate, why should wellness, nor does health. So we launched WW Good. It is our social impact platform. And its goal is to help underserved communities get access to healthier nutrition. So our first, and we said for our first summer campaign in the history of the company, we're going to activate WW Good, even though we're still doing the strategy around what the big future of it is and who's partners. So we actually did 6 festivals in North America in the most trafficked parks. So in LA, Santa Monica Pier, in New York, Union Square, and we created a wellness festival. People could come in for free. They had to cross a threshold though, and there was a sign at the threshold that said, when you cross this threshold to do something for your health, you have automatically unlocked a free month of fresh fruits and vegetables for somebody in your community right there who needs it. That was very powerful, and we contributed and we put it out there. So Union Square alone had 3,000 people, and then we also had a lot of food and food demonstrations, and so by the end of the festivals, I think we'd fed 10,000 families and 10,000 meals and 10,000 pounds of food to food banks. So now what we're doing is working with partners within communities to help us do this, whether they're community partners, health partners, et cetera. Because to your point, it's going to be very important. The thing is, there's a lot of work being done. My feeling is the work has to be a lot more syncopated. And I've been very clear that what we want to do, we don't want to do by ourselves. And so what we're looking to do when we've met with partners, one thing I didn't mention that I think is critical, every company has to have a purpose filter for decisions. So when we built that impact manifesto, we built a purpose filter. All 18,000 people in the company have a pad on their desk. It's in every conference room, and it's a purpose filter that you run through every decision, everyone you hire, or every partner you want to be in business with. And if that partner in business does not share our vision of helping to change the world get healthier, they're not the right partner. And so I think, but to your point, that's very important. Now, on the other side, I think you have to know what your company is and, where you want to play and what's right. So, as part of this Fortune initiative, it was very interesting because we talked about this. So Tim Cook spoke and he talked about the difference between politics and policy. And yes, we're going to opine on policy, but not politics. Then you had the CEO of Delta talk about his decision around the NRA, and that was their decision, or Levi's and gun control, or Nike and their new campaign. So you really have to decide. We're very comfortable talking about the implications of people not having access to healthy and having to change policy and what that means. But am I going to get into a political polarizing conversation when I know that our audience is incredibly diverse? Probably not. Yeah. So I think those are decisions that have to go through a purpose filter, just like everything else.
One quick question before we close.
Oh, mine's not a quick one, but I'll put it out there. You
All right.
said at the beginning you were interested in the human return on equity, which really got me thinking, imagine a time when we could compare companies as employees, as community members, as investors on their human return. Is there a way to get at measuring that you report to the world in something that is as, let me say simple as shareholder return, financial return on equity? Or is this something that is so complex we can never get to some simple measures to think about?
Well, I think there's expectations of that, right? So like when we put our goals out, there were brand goals, there were reputation goals, there were the impact we've made on the health of communities and people, and then there were the business goals, right? But the reality is if we deliver on all the KPIs around, let's call it the human-centric goals, we will deliver that financial return on equity, right? If we only say, here are our financial goals, we may make compromises on the other goals. Very, very quick story, because the things have changed, and I think, as you all know, the BlackRock letter and all of those, but And I don't know if you guys have ever done this in one of your offsites, but it was very powerful. So we brought our 65, 70 top leaders around the world to an offsite for 2 days, and we did a lot of interactive things. It was great. But then I also brought one of our sell-side analysts to talk about Wall Street's expectations of our brand and our business. And we obviously chose someone who we felt was forward-looking, you know. And it was, people really appreciated it because you're in France, and you're in here, and not everybody deals with the financial community other than what they read, right? So one of our GM of France asked a question, and she said, you know, when we came out with our impact manifesto and people wrote, I was very, very surprised when the stock went up, because all we really talked about was purpose, and we put the goals, but is purpose that important? He basically said the way we're looking at this is if the company does not have a purpose that's more than just a saying on the wall, we don't think it's a good investment. And more, I'm hoping, is going like that, not all. But if you're going to have the purpose, you're going to have the culture, you have to live it. Because if you say you have it and you don't, it's almost worse than not having it at all.
I think on that note, we'll stop, Mindy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just on behalf of Fred, I want to thank you for coming today and for being such a role model and for inspiring us to know that you can do it in a commercial world with investors and expectations and still adhere to your purpose and your values. So I appreciate your coming, and we all appreciate you very much. Thank you.
And thank you for your support.